Hello, my friends. I am Mother Ashley Urquidi with Old Donation Church, and I am thrilled to join with you this afternoon or morning or evening or whatever time it is that you are watching this video and talk a little bit about Romans 13. If you have not already done so, please read Romans 13. It is a short read, so it won't take you very long, and it may not make you happy, but you should read it so you know what we're talking about. Romans 13, especially the first two verses, have been used throughout all of history by any number of governments or individuals to sometimes do some pretty horrible things. This is the verse that Hitler used to defend his actions. It was used in defense of, of the British invasion during the Revolutionary War. It was used in defense of slavery, and it was used in positive ways too, but those negative ones are the ones that always stand out the most, aren't they? The big question here that we have to ask, that we ask when we're reading scripture, is, did they really mean that? Did they really mean to say what we think they said? Did Paul really say, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." Did he say it? Yes, that is exactly what Paul said. So let's look at some of the contexts here. Paul is writing to house churches in Rome. These churches are small. They have frequent contact with the outside world. So the assumption here is that they're not a contained community that never comes in contact with anyone else. This isn't the community in Acts where they were self-contained. These churches exist and have people within them who are out in the world on a daily basis. They are hiding from both Roman authorities and Jewish authorities alike. They're trying to blend in here. Synagogues at this time, synagogues and Jews as an ethnic group, they are granted certain protections by the Roman government. And these protections disappear for any groups that aren't simply ethnic in composition. And it's important to note and to remember that these small Christian communities had diverse ethnic backgrounds, religious traditions, and social statuses. They were now made up of people from all over who had all kinds of different backgrounds and things to bring. And so compelling the churches, as Paul did, to obey these ruling authorities, it kept them safe. Because the failure of a number of Christians to pay even an inflated tax might draw the authorities' attention to these house churches. Remember, the early church is still living with the expectation of the eschaton. Do you know that word? That Christ is coming, the end of the world is near. Eschatology is the study of the end of the world. And so, with that second coming, they know that Christ will come and will transform everything. And he's going to come soon. So they just have to wait a little bit longer. Knowing that the second coming is imminent, and in the meantime that their lives are at risk, well, Paul is writing this in our own contemporary history. It would be like Paul writing in times of slavery, okay? But he's writing not to tell white people to obey the law and return slaves to their masters, and that is what you need to uphold. It's more like he's writing to the slaves themselves and saying, obey the law, hang tight a little bit longer. The emancipation is coming and you can make it. Just stay alive. Paul here is writing to Christian churches who, like the slaves close to the Emancipation Proclamation, know that freedom is at their fingertips. They just have to make it that far. And so, towing the line, falling in line, doing what the government says to do, even when it might be something they don't want to do or don't agree with, is good, because then they'll live to see Christ come again. Okay, so let's stop there. Hold those thoughts, keep them in your minds, and let's talk now a little bit about these new identities of our early Christian groups. So in the book of Romans, up to chapters 12 and 13, Paul has been redrawing the boundaries of the people of God. Okay, the boundaries have been clear for a long time. You are Jewish, you are a descendant of Abraham, and you are a child of God. You are one of God's own. Now, God is not just of the Jews. God is of Jew and Gentile. And so that makes things a little different. He's arguing that all throughout his letter to the Romans. So he's reminding the people that this covenant promise that was made to Abraham's offspring applies to them too. That it wasn't just a physical descent, but a spiritual one. We know Paul talks a lot about circumcision. And so all of these arguments about circumcision and not worrying about it anymore and circumcising the heart instead, all of that is, again, more reminders of this new community that is developing. And the thought that while at the time circumcision was necessary to physically distinguish the Jewish people, to write the letter of the law, of God's law, on their bodies, now God's law is written in the heart. That's what that circumcision of the heart means when you hear that in Scripture. So God's law is written on the heart. And this continued emphasis on God's love and God's mercy and God's favor being for Jew and Gentile alike is prevalent all throughout Romans. And so now that these boundaries have been redefined, well, Paul needs to help establish this new rule of life. How are these people going to live? And so the focus becomes on the Spirit, which encompasses Jewish law, and not just on the law itself. Redrawing these boundaries, reminding these people that they are now all one, even though they come from, like we said, so many different backgrounds and traditions, that they bring so many different religious beliefs and identities to one another and to these Christian churches. Well, it is really hard work to solidify these boundaries. They are having major identity crises all over the place, and they are threatened from the outside by these Roman authorities. And so it's really hard work. And I think it's especially hard for the Jews, who are so used to being within their own circle, that chosen people, and now they're having to welcome others in, and it's hard to remember that. It's hard to get that concept. It means that God's reach is all-encompassing, that he can get into the hearts of anyone, even governing authorities. So Paul's command to follow the law of the authorities, his statement that they are appointed by God, well, it's concrete and it's firm and it's even a shocking reminder that God is not only working within the Jewish people, but within anyone and everyone. It makes room for the concept that God maybe has motives and doings that we don't know or even understand. And so a good place to start is with respect. Note that this command, this reminder of God's presence, if you will, is bracketed by frequent reminders that all of this takes place within the context of the greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is something else that Paul is always talking about. Love. Paul wrote that 1 Corinthians passage that we read at our weddings. Paul writes on love all the time. And he keeps love within this concept of responding to the authorities, of giving them the respect they are due, because he is allowing that with God appointing authorities, with God working in the realm of this world in any and every way, that if we can act in love, then we can love all. And so that is the real command here. To show love to those authorities. To show love to your neighbor. To show love to yourself. To protect yourself so that you can continue to show that love. Okay, 2 final notes, and I'll be quick, I promise. First, we have all of these letters of Paul, and we study them in depth so that we can pick it apart and analyze them and figure out what it is that he was saying and what it means for us, and it's great fun to do. Remember, they were not written for the entire world. They weren't written for the 21st century. These letters were written by one man to one community dealing with one set of situations in the 1st century. And so I like to imagine sometimes that Paul sits up in those pearly gates, and he's up in the clouds, and he looks down and he listens in on some of these debates we have and says, yeah, I said that to them. I didn't mean it as a blanket statement for all of eternity. Remember, these are letters that are written by someone who was divinely connected and inspired. And we have one piece of the story. And we are living centuries away at such a great distance from this original audience. Just have that in mind always. So maybe you read Romans 13 and it all makes sense to you. Or maybe you read it and it infuriates you. Or maybe you fall somewhere in between. But the last thing to remember is that whether you like Paul or not, you don't always have to agree with him. You can, but you don't have to. In fact, many of his contemporaries did not always agree with him. So, wherever you fall on this debate, know that you are in good company. I am really looking forward to getting into this more with you on Thursday. Please join me at 11 a.m. or 7 p.m. Bring your questions, bring your thoughts, bring your challenges. Take a look at chapter 13. Look at 12 if you want to as well, because it all ties in. Read all of Romans if you have the time and the desire. And I really look forward to seeing you soon. All right, bye for now.